All right, so in the last episode of Unity Compile and Continue Playing, our deep dive into whether or not what it's going to take to actually support that feature in Unity, we basically came across that statics were not covered, that we cannot use statics in our code. Effectively, this video, everything in it is going to prove the exact same thing again. I just ended up trying to test out and experiment with a lot more things along the way and come up with even more definitive clarifications on it. All of them still showed that there was that statics were out. Now, I did come up with another test case that I'm planning on doing following this video. And that one is going to be that I'm going to put in I'm going to split our code up into two separate assembly definitions and put the code that I want to hold on to static variables into one assembly, into one assembly definition. And I'm going to put the code that I'm going to make changes to on the fly in another one. Now that seems like a reasonable way to separate things anyway, so that's kind of a good place to go with this. But for right now, barring the actual tests on that setup, the rest of the code did not work, or it did not end up getting statics to work, and basically just had more proofs that it wasn't. If you're interested in following along, I'm going to walk through the tests that I actually ran on this. Okay, so let's walk into it now. Otherwise, you can just move on and skip the rest of this video. Okay, so first of all, I have one object here. This is a mono behavior. It's called a singleton, and I was testing out that idea of a singleton instance, where this would be the instance field, except I called it inst object. And that's a reference to itself. So anything else would have been able to say a singleton dot inst object and have access to this object and all its data, which right now only has this public field that it would be able to see. Otherwise, these are all static fields. Now, at the start of it, every single one of them got set up properly, including this a scriptable, which I have once by reference, once by field reference, once by static field reference. And then I also set its value. So when I make a change by doing something like, say, commenting out this line and then letting it run to the next frame, what I end up seeing in this is that all these fields go away, including the one that was held inside of the scriptable object. Okay, so scriptable objects aren't able to hold on to static data either through these changes. Okay, and this is the scriptable object. The scriptable object has these methods being called. All of the methods are being called, and they pass in that, hey, I've been called, and I add to it. So if I get called multiple times, then we get to see that accumulate over time. And there's also one additional field, the change me one, which I used in the other one. And this one disappears. They all disappear every time that I end up having to do a recompile and continue. They also all disappear between the states of running it in the editor and hitting the play button. So if I stop the game, but I'm still in the editor, it clears all the statics, but the statics are there again. They are there, they're just cleared out, so I can use them again and start over fresh. And then once I hit play, it flushes everything out that may have changed in the editor and then starts it again fresh. Okay, so scriptable objects lost it all as well. And additionally, I did one other super long object, super long code script that basically just allows every single function inside of Unity to be called. Now, a lot of them just don't get triggered at all because it's on things like on joint break, on GUI, which was being called a lot. So I just commented that one out for the time being. Because with that one, you pretty much don't need to be doing anything. It gets called multiple times while in the editor. Collision detections, we're doing update, awake, fixed, late update. All those things are being called. And what I was doing with this is I was keeping a copy in a static string of every single message, every function that was called, including one for just clicking on a menu. There was a menu item that I put in there to click on. And if that was in there, it was going to record that variable as a log, so it keeps accumulating those. And it adds it to this local static log. It also loads up a file where it grabs the file, starts with nothing. If the file exists, it grabs it. But otherwise, it just starts adding the content and timestamp to it. And then saves it all back again, gets the number of lines, and then says, okay, debug.log b file. So I actually put 2 records in the log every single time. One saying a static b file, just so I have that order in there as well. And it tells me how many lines there are. So this ends up matching the entire way through. It's supposed to, until I do a recompile and continue playing. And then the a static one reverts back to its beginning numbers. It initially goes to 0 on the static one, but any call to trigger this has effectively already added another 3 lines to it. 1 line, 2 line, 3 lines. So it starts out with 3 lines right off the bat. Okay, and this showed the exact same thing. It showed that it was executing, the data was getting in there, and then once I actually ran it, or recompiled, but still continuing to play, that the local static variables were all gone. Now, the other thing that I can think of right now to possibly test with this to see if we can somehow maintain static objects or data inside of the recompile is, what about assembly definitions? What if I were to actually split this code into 2 different assembly definitions? So one of the reasons for the assembly definitions in the beginning is so that you don't have to recompile everything. Now, if I don't have to recompile everything, does that also mean that it doesn't serialize and wipe out the data and then restart it? Does it maintain that data? My theory on it is that it actually is going to wipe out all of the state data in memory, because we have 2 references of objects, and they'll lose each other's references between each other when they suddenly cut out a whole bunch of objects that are from one assembly and then put in a new assembly that has matching data, reinstantiates all those objects. Our original classes from one side of this are not going to know about the others. So I'm theorizing that that's not going to happen, that it's not going to work. We're still not going to be able to keep our static data. But I think that's a reasonable spot to check, because it's not actually recompiling that part. So we might be getting by with a hack, because if it's not recompiling all of the code, and so we might be able to get by with a recompile and continue playing, even though it's not technically recompiling. All right, but green, go away. There we go. I have no idea why that's happening, but the lighting messes up on my system every now and then, and it just has the green screen off balance enough, and it goes away when I flap my arms, or if I stretch my arms far enough back. Okay, anyway, that's the next section that I'm going to look at. I'm going to be looking at trying another assembly definition to see if it maintains that data. Additionally, I'm planning on doing one deeper step into it, where it's not just like a mono behavior in a separate one that's holding on to static data, but I'm planning on doing that 2 steps deep. I'm planning on doing that where I'm actually testing a static object, where I'm testing an object that just purely exists statically. So it's not a locator, it's not a mono behavior, it's not a mono behavior, it's not a scriptable object. It is just purely a static object, and it is housed inside of a separate addressable assembly. The reason that I'm thinking that might exist is because Unity won't necessarily know to go clear that one out. And if it doesn't go clear that one out, even if it does clear all the other state objects, there's a reasonable chance that that data will remain. So we could potentially use that to house data. Now, there also is the risk that Unity is taking a look at any of the pieces of memory that are touching each other and saying, okay, this object is being referenced by here, 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 and here. this other scriptable in this static object, this static state, and it's taking a look at this data and saying, okay, well, this one is referencing it, so I'm going to flush this one too. Again, there's reasons why it might fail or work, but that's what I'm going to be testing with this next one. Now, in addition to that, feel free to take a look at this code. It's all on GitHub. It's available to use. If you have other ideas beyond this to experiment with, please comment in the code or comment down below. Go ahead and talk about what you've tried or are considering trying. You don't need to try it. Just tell me about your thoughts on this, and I can try it out. And if you try it, great, that's awesome. I'm still planning on duplicating the code just to validate 100% on these things. And also, if you find a bug in my code, please comment on that, because I ended up re-recording this video like 12 times, every time kind of flip-flopping, where, oh, it's actually storing static data now, and no, it's not storing static, and oh, it is, and all because I ended up having bugs in my code where I was mistakenly, one time I was keeping the line counts the exact same, where I was just using the same line count reference and the things. Another one where I accidentally was taking the static data and saving that back to the file every time. So after I ran it, it would just show up as the right thing again. And so there were a couple bugs in my code originally. Now, if you end up finding other bugs, and I'm not talking about like, oh, this is bad performance, like I'm not using a string builder, or I have some of these weird things in here, like on this case, this was actually another thing to put a code change to trigger a recompile. And it works. I mean, the code works. It proved out again that statics are not available, and I have some tests to go, but I would love to hear your feedback. All right, thanks.